Welcome to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Colum, Knowledge Base Manager at Mimecast Services Limited, a cybersecurity provider that helps thousands of organizations worldwide make email safer, restore trust, and bolster cyber resilience. Welcome, Colum, to Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Gary, and hello, everybody who's listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, Colum. So let's get a quick introduction about yourself, the nature of business, to get some context into.
Sure. So, I've been working in the technical communications field for, I think it's about 20 years now. I kind of fell into it by accident, which is it's kind of an interesting story. So, at the time, I was working at a software firm as an account manager, and we had one part of the one product that we had that was really very badly documented. So, one of the directors at the time pulled a few of us together and said, you go away and write something and come back in a week and we'll see what we got. And so we each went away and did our own thing, came back, and it was obviously something that they spotted in me then, because a year or two later on, when the company decided it needed a technical writer, they came to me and offered me the role. So that's kind of where I've kind of come from, and I've had a couple of roles since then. To where I am today. I mean, at Mimecast, I've got a slightly sort of nuanced role. When I started there, I was the only technical writer, but I was also doing a bit of copywriting on the side as well. That's kind of grown with the company. So, now I actually manage a team of technical writers and also community managers who look after the whole of the end user community as well.
Fantastic. Wow. That's really nice to hear, Colum. Did you say 20 years of experience in technical writing?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I'm getting old now.
You've got plenty of experience. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
So I think you kind of answered my next question, like how did you initially got into documentation? You did mention it was an accident, right?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, do you know what? It's interesting. When I was a real youngster, even before I started working, I can remember a particular instance where I'm Irish originally, although you can't really tell from my accent anymore. But my aunt and uncle were coming across from Dublin to visit us in London, and they asked us for directions of how to drive from Holyhead. They were taking the car ferry across from Dublin to Holyhead, and to drive from Holyhead in North Wales down to London. And so I sort of sat down in those days, it wouldn't have been with a sat-nav, of course, it would have been just with a paper map, and try to map out sort of key towns, key changes in routes and things like that they could take. And I kind of had sort of an annotation in mind that was really just a bunch of arrows and with M5, M1, Birmingham, all the key points on that, and sent it to them. But of course, it was by post in those days as well. And that was kind of the first time I sort of thought, well, actually, I'm quite good at sort of, telling people what they need to know in a format that they can quickly digest and use.
Yep. Very good. Yeah, I remember those days where there was no sat-nav, and I have experienced traveling with maps as well, Colum. So,
yeah.
Great. So given that the vast amount of experience you have, so what is your documentation process, and who do you normally involve in such process-defining stages?
Yeah, do you know what? It's kind of different in the different roles I've had. I mean, at Mimecast, we do have a process. And most of the time it works. I think one of the things about having a process is it's kind of, it shouldn't, or very rarely I find actually it should be taken as gospel. It's kind of a, if you like, a guideline. I mean, I think where we are at the moment, I think although we're a large company, well, coming up to being a large company now, and we've been going for almost 20 years, we've still got very much a sort of a startup mentality at heart. So, and I think one of the things about anybody who's worked for a startup company is that process isn't necessarily at the forefront of people's minds. So, I think the key is to be flexible with the process as well. I mean, by all means, have the process, but at the end of the day, when something has to be done, you might have to bend the rules a little bit. I mean, as far as our process is concerned, we work largely with our product team. I mean, we get a lot of the information that we need to know from the product managers and the product marketing teams. So we work very, very closely with them. We attend a lot of meetings with them, particularly me, a lot of strategy meetings about what's likely to come up. And so we get an idea then of the impact of any documentation changes and also when they're likely to happen. So that's kind of the key stakeholders for us. I mean, we do have a few other stakeholders as well, particularly we have worked very closely with our customer experience and customer support teams. And they're at the front line. They're the ones that are actually taking the calls. So if our documentation isn't up to scratch, or there's something that's not quite meeting the needs of that particular customer, then obviously we need to know about that. So we do get a lot of calls from, or a lot of cases from them, just to maybe add a bit of nuance to the documentation, or just to add something, or just change it in a minor way. I mean, as far as the process is concerned, our process is quite clear. I mean, we actually tell people to, apart from actually coming to us and talking to us, and just, I think people sort of think of documentation and technical writers as people who kind of sit in a basement somewhere in the dark, and just a bit like something from the IT crowd, if you've seen that program. But I'm very keen to get on the front foot and sort of evangelize our role and what we can do for others, apart from what they can do for us. So it's a two-way process. So we have a DL, a document distribution list, which people can email, and that'll automatically create a Jira case for us to follow and for them to follow as well. So it's very much about getting the communication channel open and following things through to completion.
Fantastic. So that I really like that approach of being very proactive and being an evangelist rather than just waiting for them to come and tell you it's time for documentation. Great. So what do you think are the important factors to consider when creating documentation, not only for SaaS business, but for any kind of successful organization?
That's a good question. I always tell my staff to try and use the software before they do anything. And even when they're actually documenting it, to have the software open side by side. We actually have the way we tend to work is quite often people will send us content, and they'll say, here's a Word document with what you need. And, quite often, we're the best one in the world. Some of the people that write this documentation, let's put it this way, have got a particular focus in mind. So they're looking at it from a product point of view, from a marketing perspective. They're not thinking it from an end user perspective necessarily. So you can open it up, and yes, there's a lot of good detail in there. But if you've got the content or the actual the SaaS product or whatever it is side by side, you can quite often pick up on things which haven't been included because the original author thought it wasn't relevant, or just completely forgot about because they're focusing on one particular process. So I think it's important to look at the whole picture, the whole spectrum of what the product can do when you're documenting, so that you don't leave something out. I mean, the number of times I've sort of got content from a Word file, and then you go into the product and you've realized that, well, actually, whilst they say you can do something by clicking on a button, you can actually do it in a number of other different ways, but haven't been included, via a right-click menu item or an icon or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Exactly. So very well said, Colum. So there could be a lot of ways you could do one thing, even sometimes better, provided there is good documentation to go with. Very good. Yeah. So I think that kind of ties in well with my next question. So you might have partly answered this as well. So what role do you think a good documentation have in your customer service or success strategy?
No, I think it's actually central to everything we do. As I was saying in the introduction, my team's responsible for what we call our Mimecast central community. So it's basically our end user community, which includes not just the knowledge base, but also the user forums, any sort of service updates we might publish, and that type of content. So it is kind of the one-stop shop for all of our users to go to for information about our products and our services. So the knowledge base forms the majority of the content, but the user-generated content is just as much value. So it's kind of refreshing, I think, where I am now. I mean, I've worked in multiple companies where technical documentation wasn't really used, or where it was really just a disparate collection of material. At Mimecast, it's to hear our support engineers actively using the knowledge base and sending links out to customers. We use links in our interactive elements inside our products and inside wizards, so that it's kind of front and center of pretty much everything we do. So it has to be of a sufficiently high quality to meet the customer's needs, and obviously reduce those support calls coming in. And I'd kind of also add, I think we're still in the very early stages of a process of doing something called knowledge-centric content. So this is kind of where, if a support call comes in, we can actually sort of highlight one or two sort of knowledge based links, content, which might help answer the customer's query straight away.
Sure.
But if it doesn't, and obviously it goes through to the support engineer can then email us with whatever it was that the page didn't answer, so that we can then curate the content and sort of improve the content going forward.
Yep, that's true. So this is where the collaboration comes with different teams, isn't it, to make your knowledge base or documentation more richer and to the point.
Exactly, yeah.
Great. So what kind of reduction in workload have you seen since introducing quality documentation? Of course, your support tickets might reduce. That's one way of measuring, I guess.
Yeah. Do you know, it's really difficult to answer that question. And I was listening to one or two of your other podcasts, and I think those people who participated in that had the same sort of difficulty answering this question.
Yeah.
I think Mimecast isn't a place to work if you want an easy life. Let's put that. I mean that in the nicest possible way. I think one with us, it's kind of difficult to answer that for a number of reasons. But I think kind of the major reason is that over the years we've acquired a number of customers. A number of different companies. So we've had to sort of bring their knowledge base content online as well, and we're constantly involving product line. So I mean, as I was kind of intimating earlier on, we have a very, very dynamic product line, which is constantly changing, and we've got a very small team of technical writers to produce the content. So I absolutely thoroughly enjoy it, because I mean I've worked in companies where it's been boom and bust, where you've kind of worked for like a madman for a month, and then you have a month where you're just sitting around twiddling your thumbs, and I'd hated that. At Mimecast, it's never a dull moment. There's always something going on. So as far as reduction in workload is concerned, I think it's kind of difficult, really. I mean, with some of the content we've brought in from some of the companies we provided, it's quite interesting seeing how other people do it, how they produce their content. I mean, it's been ranged from companies where we bought where the technical documentation was really just like a 15 to 20 page PDF made up of mainly screenshots through to more sort of fully developed WordPress sites where we could just dump, the content out to some sort of file that we can import. But even then, some of the content we've had has been very sort of chatty. I mean, I can give you an example where we were reading through some technical documentation of a company where they'd said something along the lines of, once you've completed task X, go make yourself a cup of tea. And we had to sort of, obviously to remove all this stuff to bring it into our star guide. So, so it's kind of an interesting time at Mimecast where there's lots of variety, lots of stuff going on. So to see a reduction in our workload, I think, if we ever see a reduction in my workload, I think it's a time to think about moving on because it means the company is not growing.
Yeah, to be really honest, everybody has struggled to answer that particular question because, as you rightly said, documentation is something that people might sometimes take it very lightly, and they might not bring that into the measure of success, into the measurement of success. So so that's why we've kind of slightly tweaked the next question to say, how do you measure the quality of your documentation?
That's also another question, and I have to be honest, we don't. My team falls into a larger team called customer operations, and that team does have some measurements, but it's really focused on support. So it's kind of doing things like measuring that support calls are answered within a certain time frame and that type of measurement. So our team at the moment, at least anyway, isn't really measured. I do maintain some metrics myself, just for my own personal reference more than anything else, and just in case I do need to justify why I need another head. Can be quite useful to get details of the number of cases we get in. So we're averaging about 40 work requests a month, which for a team of 2 technical writers really is quite a lot. Last month we had 67, which was an interesting month. But I mean, thankfully a lot of them are quite small, so they can be quite quickly handled. So that's about as far as we go, really. The metrics I keep are really just to try and sort of spot any trends that might appear over the years. I've been keeping them for about 3 years now, and we kind of categorize each change into sort of minor, medium, major, but then also the type of change, whether it's a new bit of functionality or whether it's an error or some sort of improvement and things like that. So it's quite useful to sort of keep that type of information at hand.
Very nice. Yeah, I think every time you answer my question, it really shows how passionate you are about the work you do. Even though the company doesn't demand, you want to keep a track of the amount of documentation you're doing on a monthly basis. So that's really good to know, Colum. Super.
I was just going to add that I kind of take the opinion that I'm lucky in the sense that I'm kind of left alone to my own devices quite a lot. So, if people think that we're doing a bad job, then obviously they'll be the first people to tell me. So the very fact that I don't hear that means I must be doing a reasonable job.
Something correct, yeah. Great. So, given the nature of your company and the products that you have in the market, so are you currently generating any organic search traffic from your knowledge base?
Yes, we are. It's interesting you asked that question because one of the things that we're looking into in the provider that we have for our community is to make sure that the search is good and returns the right results. Now, we've recently changed providers, and in the old provider, there was kind of one thing I noticed when I was walking around is that people were using Google and various other search engines to find our content. It's one of the reasons why we started to look around at other providers, because we kind of realized that the old provider, the search engine, that didn't always provide the same type of results as Google. So, in fact, it's kind of become a habit particularly of a lot of our search engineers to actually use the Google search engine rather than the search engine inside the the platform that provides our community. But I will say one thing against that. Well, not against it. But, I mean, obviously, we're a security provider. So we do have some content that's behind a firewall. So, I mean, we don't want all and sundry getting hold of details that they can use to circumnavigate the way that our customers configure their systems to protect themselves against things like spam and impersonation and emails and stuff like that. So, yes, a lot of our content is publicly available and is freely accessible from search engines, but there is a subset that isn't.
Okay, great. So I think that brings me to the end of the slow questions. Now it's going to be a rapid fire round. So it's just 3 questions, just to get more experience from your side. So who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
Yes. So in a past job, I used to use Adobe RoboHelp a lot. And when I first started to use that, obviously it was quite a sort of sea change from anything I'd used before. So I thought the best thing to do would be to try and get some sort of training on it. So I did a bit of sort of self-learning on that, e-learning courses. But then once you start to use it for real, you start to realize that you know very little about it. And you know the theory, but in practice, there's a lot more you can do with it. So I've always been very keen to get onto product forums and to pick up bits of advice from people on those types of sites. And for the Adobe RoboHelp, it was people like John Daigle, Rick Stone, Peter Grange. They're well-known names on the Adobe RoboHelp forum sites. So those 3 people, I think, are standout people I've learned a lot from. I mean, I don't use RoboHelp anymore. But that type of career advice is definitely worth doing. Get out there. You'd be amazed at the number of different types of blogs. As this podcast is an example of the types of things you can learn just free of charge in most cases. So just get out there, do a bit of research yourself as to what's out there, and just get involved.
Great. So can you share a documentation related resource you have consumed recently?
I can, yes. So I had been in the past a fellow of the Institute of Scientific and Technical Communicators, the ISTC. I'm not anymore, but I still subscribe to their magazine. It's a quarterly magazine it's just called Communicator. And it's an absolute steal at £4 a quarter. For the online edition, you could just download a PDF. And it's full of really, really good articles in there. It covers a wide spectrum of different forms of technical documentation. Not just SaaS products. It's a great resource. So yeah, that's definitely one to look out for.
So did you say Communicator?
Yes. Yeah. If you go onto the ISTC's website, it's got a link there to the actual communication.
Fantastic. All right. So this question is always exciting to ask, and the answers that we get. So what's that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
I'd say never stop learning. There's a reason why the dinosaurs are extinct. In this business, you need to evolve, and be proud of your achievements, but don't live off the credit for them for too long. No sooner have you press that publish button, it's there, and yes, it'll look good, but you can bet your bottom dollar in another month or 2 or 3 months, you'll look at it and go, blimey, did I write that? So a number of times I've sort of looked at stuff I've written and thought, that's not very good. It's what little things are. And also kind of just remember you're never going to reach the sort of perfect piece of documentation, because there's always something to, I don't know, some different perspective to look at, or some resource constraint, which means you can't spend as much time on it as possible. So, strive for perfection, but if you don't get it, it doesn't really matter. Well, that's what I say.
Move on. Yeah. Fantastic. Great. So brilliant, Colum. Thank you once again. And I will keep you posted on the podcast coming live.
Lovely. Thank you, Gary. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah. Right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.